time for talk is over.
Can you come help me with this?
Remember, kids, just say no to drugs and yes to Geek Legion of Doom.
What's this movie, you furry fools? Masters of the Universe, directed by Travis Knight and stars Nicholas Galitzine, Idris Elba, Alison Brie, and Jared Leto as Skeletor. Now, I have to tell you, Masters of the Universe was one of my favourite fandoms when I were a boy. So I was quite excited to see this. Now, the story is about Adam, as you'd probably expect, who is a refugee from the planet of Eternia, and he is sent to Earth at the beginning of the movie to hide him and the sword away from Skeletor, who is making a move on Eternia. We cut to 15 years later where Adam has grown up in Earth, but he still remembers Eternia and is still sort of trying to find a way back there, but everyone just thinks he's mad. Eventually, he ends up finding a way back, and then the rest of the movie is set on Eternia as Adam is now kind of reintroduced to the characters that you're going to be expecting, coming face to face with Skeletor and his henchmen. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. What do I think works in this movie's favour? Now, this was never going to be like a serious movie, because it is based on an 80s toy line, which of course spawned comics and cartoon shows. And the toy line was originally kind of a Conan the Barbarian style line of figures that they then made the cartoon show to kind of create stories for it and stuff. So, but over the time, it's kind of, it seemed quite camp, you know, it seemed sort of cheesy, and it's always going to be a hard one to adapt in a way, because where do you set the tone with this? You know, who is it really aimed at? And I think the answer to that is aimed at 50-year-old adults and probably younger children to try and get them into the kind of the property. That's who it seems to me. So does it succeed in those areas? So let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. So this is more faithful to the kind of the cartoons and the kind of the figures than, say, the Dolph Lundgren version. He may have a small cameo, but don't be too expecting too much from it. So, you know, you've got accurate recreations for a lot of the kind of the characters here, you know, brought to life in quite kind of cartoon or comics or figure accurate depiction. So I really liked the kind of the production design here. And I think the world of Eternia, it's very much like a kind of Thor Ragnarok style existence, if you're not too familiar with it, where it's a blend of fantasy and science fiction, you know, and you know, we really only see small parts of it, to be honest with you, but it's I think it's a fun you know, it's a fun world, certainly, and from what we do see it, and it's lots of kind of colourful characters that are there. I think the movie actually does some decent work with kind of characterization. So, you know, you get to know the Adam He-Man character, and I think the idea, there have been criticism about setting some stuff on Earth, but I understand why they've done that, because they need a kind of a jumping in point for people who are not familiar with this property, because it's an older property now. So how are you gonna, you know, how are you gonna introduce fans that aren't necessarily familiar with this? So you have a character who, you know, is an Earth-based character for the most part, going into this kind of fantastic world, even though he does remember Eternia, so it's not like a complete fish out of water. But it gives us a point of view character where we can relate to him in the real world, and then he's going on this kind of fantastic adventure. And there is still, you know, a clash of cultures where he is bringing kind of Earth mentalities and stuff, and we'll touch on again that in a little bit. So I understand why they've done that, and I appreciate it. You know, I thought it was fine. I thought that didn't bother me in regards to a story element here. And I do think I still quite enjoyed the Earth scenes, and there's a really great action sequence involving Beastman in the Earth scene, and which leads me to talk about some characters here on the plus, because I do feel some characters are portrayed particularly well, and the two villains I'm going to say are Beastman and Trapjaw. Beastman is this huge kind of CGI creation, but he seems genuinely dangerous. And there's a scene early on where he, you know, basically comes to Earth and it's just like ripping up the street looking for Adam and stuff. And, you know, he seems pretty unstoppable at times. So, you know, I thought he came across quite well, where he seems like a genuinely dangerous threat. And Trapjaw, who is one of my favourites, him and Triclops. Trapjaw gets a surprising amount of screen time, and he's almost like the number 2 villain. And he has a kind of almost like a rivalry with Man-at-Arms. And there's a couple of pretty decent fights with him. He actually gets 3 like fight scenes, and you know, we spend a reasonable amount of time. And again, he's built up to be quite threatening. I mean, he you know, I'd say who, but he wins one of his fights. Let's just say that. So, you know, he's not like a pushover, so the villains aren't portrayed to be just kind of like disposable henchmen. Goatman, who is a more recent creation as well, seems quite formidable, though we don't spend as much time with him. Skeletor, I have sort of mixed feelings on, to be honest with you. He kind of sounds like he's drunk sometimes on the negative, but the aesthetic, I think, you know, he looks fantastic. And there is that sort of degree of making Skeletor a little bit camp, very much like the kind of the original sort of style cartoon. Adam is more like the 2002 version of the Master of the Universe character, of where his Adam persona is a little bit of a wimp, and you know, he's given the more of the power than to become He-Man, whilst the original cartoon really they were the same person. There was not a lot of difference really, and it was just a disguise really to cover for He-Man. So, but there's more of a, you know, when as Adam, he's not particularly combat ready. Let's just say that. So I generally quite liked some of the characters. And I thought the action sequences for the most part were pretty good. The VFX we'll touch on again, but I think there's some, you know, it's sort of the Marvel era of CGI kind of backdrops and stuff. You know, there are noticeable CGI elements to this, but it's still a sort of somewhat of a fun, you know, action sequences involving vehicles and things like this. So that was all pretty good. There are some interesting themes. Now I don't normally watch reviews before I go and see a film, but I did watch a couple of reviews here. And something that wasn't mentioned on the 2 reviews that I've seen is some of the themes here. And I found it interesting because I wondered if this was really noticed, because there's a couple of themes about kind of the way that humans conduct themselves, should we call it. So the Eternians are very much like macho, sort of, you know, nut up or shut up and don't be a wimp, you've got to stand up for yourself and sort of, you know, be strong, be a winner, there's no second place, be a, you know, all that sort of very kind of alpha male coded, which I found, I was surprised at, considering this is a Hollywood movie, which is, you know, more of a sort of, almost like a kind of a right-wing sort of ideology. And then the kind of, when we see Adam at Earth, he's at this workplace where he's in this office environment, everyone is kind of like, touchy-feely, talking about their feelings, a very kind of more left-wing sort of ideology. And I was like, interesting. So they've kind of juxtaposed these two sort of styles of how to conduct oneself, shall we call it. And towards the end of the movie, without kind of giving away sort of spoilers here, it's like, is there elements that you can learn from both? Is kind of where I'll go with that. And you know, it was like, it's an interesting idea where it's like, okay, it's sort of saying both of these things can exist together, or you can use elements of both. It's not an either-or kind of situation. So I thought there were some interesting themes there that were kind of touched on, and it's not something I've seen in other reviews. I haven't watched every review, but certainly the couple that I watched didn't really mention that. So for me, I found that pretty interesting. I thought the music was good. I enjoyed the kind of the kind of 80s kind of style rock kind of soundtrack with Brian May doing a lot of the guitars. I liked Nicholas Galitzine, and even some characters that I would never really fussed at, like Tila in the cartoons. I kind of quite liked Tila and stuff. But what did it work for me? There were characters that got shortchanged. Number one, which I think is going to be far and away the one that I think people will be most disappointed with, is Battle Cat. Do not be expecting much in the way of Battle Cat. Let me just say that. Some of the villains as well. Triclops is little more than a cameo. So there are some villains and heroes that don't get a lot to do. Some of the kind of characters that did have a bit more screen time, I have mixed feelings on. I have mixed feelings on Skeletor. It's an interesting take. He's a little bit varied in regards to his kind of how threatening he is. It doesn't feel like they've quite decided on the tone for Skeletor, because sometimes he's very comedic, other times he seems threatening, other times he seems clueless. So it felt like they hadn't really decided on a way to go with the Skeletor character. So he ended up being a little bit of a mixed bag for me. And he didn't really particularly seem to have much of a plan in regards to what he wanted. It just seemed to be cause destruction. Evil Lynn, to me, was a little bit of a missed opportunity. She gets a reasonable amount of screen time. But to me, if you look at the cartoons and the comics and stuff, she was always quite capable. And I didn't really think she had a lot to do, to be honest with you. And I think Alison Brie's performance was a little soft. I would have liked to have seen a harder edge to Evil Lynn, to be honest with you. And like I said, some of the characters, Triclops, Spycore, are just kind of muscle that don't really have any like lines or anything like that. So you know, and then the same with our kind of our good guys. You know, there are some kind of funny elements that are added. Let me talk about the humour actually. The humour is, there's some positives and negatives. The humour, I think, is a difficult one because this movie was never going to be a serious film. It was always going to be a comedic film. But I do think they stretch out some of the humour a little bit too much, and where it could have been a little bit more dramatic, it ends up being like jokes that just go on for too long, or a joke that sort of undercuts some of the tension. But there are some kind of like humour that I do think work. There's also a lot of references. There's a lot of subtle Easter eggs here, like that I think non-fans just won't get. Like if you're not a fan of Master of the Universe, you know, it will go over your head. Like Queen Marlena makes a fleeting reference that she was from Earth. You know, the original, like, when Adam finds his sword, it's in like a toy shop, and it's like on this model, which was like the original sort of concept art for He-Man. And then even at the end, there's like a joke with everyone kind of laughing, and they've basically copied the kind of like the pose from the kind of the cartoon and things like that, just to give you a few. But I think these little Easter egg moments are quite subtle. Some are not as subtle, but if you're a fan of the Master of the Universe, I think a lot of this will kind of go over people's heads, I would say. Just go back to some of the negatives though. I think, again, some of the characters, I think we spent a little bit too much time with Man-at-Arms, I thought. And I think because you've got Idris Elba, who is arguably probably the biggest name in this, they wanted him to have him lots of screen time. But I don't think his sort of presence warranted as much screen time, to be honest. The VFX, I mean, it kind of looks like not quite finished rendered CGI at times, I have to say. It looks like a CGI environment, and then when we do have physical sets, it looks like sets with green screen. So the VFX sometimes it looks great. We see like a wide shot of Snake Mountain in the background, for example, looks great. But other times I think it looks not quite rendered to the best it could have been ultimately. So, you know, I think this movie had a bit of an uphill battle in regards to trying to pick a tone. And I think it's tried to go for, as I say, older fans and younger fans, or new fans. And I think it sort of generally would be seen as quite an enjoyable movie. I actually went with someone who hated this film, so it's not going to be for everyone, certainly. But I actually quite enjoyed it, and I thought it sort of succeeded in what it was trying to do, but I don't think what it was trying to do it will be enough for people, or other people will not just not like what it's trying to do, but they might feel it's too silly, too lightweight, too comedic. But I thought it sort of worked more than it didn't. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. What were your thoughts if you've seen it? Leave me comments and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Remember, kids, just say no to drugs and yes to Geek Legion of Doom.